Christian, of course, began searching for both of his boys right away. Now, after Walter had walked out of the store and noticed that the carriage was gone, he began to cry. He was very upset. I'm assuming he really honestly did not know where he was, and a stranger miraculously found him and was able to take him home to his father. After Walter met up with his father Christian, he told him about how the two strange men had enticed them with candy and fireworks, and then drove off with Charley in their buggy while he was in the store. Walter said that one of the men had a very strange nose, but that he did not know who they were. Walter kept saying the nose looked like a monkey nose at the time. Now, during this time, Charley's mother, Sarah Ross, was living in Atlantic City. She was recovering from an illness, so she was not even at home with the family during this time period. Her husband, Christian, decided to not tell her about the missing Charley, and he even chose to not tell police about his missing son. Now, something to consider is, at the time, it was not super common for kids to go missing, and so I'm wondering if he just was kind of unaware as to the protocol and what next steps he should take. But Christian instead chose to advertise for the safe return of his son Charley in the newspaper instead of involving the cops. Now, 2 days after the advertisement for Charley was published in the papers, Christian received his first ransom letter. The ransom letter was written with very odd handwriting, and most of the words were misspelled, even super easy, simple words. So it's unknown as to whether the kidnappers or the writers of this ransom note, were just not super intelligent, or if they were writing it this way on purpose. The first ransom letter was written and sent from somewhere in Philadelphia, and they requested a ransom of $20,000, which is well over $400,000 today. The note also told Christian and Sarah to not go to the police about their missing son, and to instead pay the ransom to get him back fully unharmed. Now, the kidnappers most likely assumed that the Ross family was wealthy, since they lived in a really nice house, and Christian owned a dry goods store in Philadelphia. However, the Ross family was not wealthy at this time, since the stock market had crashed in 1873, and they owed a lot of debts at the shoot at the two burglars that they saw inside the home. A man named Bill Mosher, who was one of the burglars, died instantly after being shot. The second man, who was the other burglar, was named Joe Douglas. Joe had been hit by the gunfire, but did not die instantly. Joe at this point lived for 2 more hours before he passed away. During this time, Joe was lying in Judge Van Brunt's home when he decided to confess, and he told Holmes and the others around him that lying was pointless at this point since he was on his deathbed. Joe claimed that he and Bill, his dead cohort, had been the two that had kidnapped Charley Ross. Now the reports from everyone that night claim a few different things, since everyone who was involved in helping stop the burglary, they were all pretty shaken up that night. And that incident kind of left them a little bit off kilter. So some say that Joe said Charley had been killed, and others say that Joe said Bill knew where Charley was located, and that he would be returned to his family within a few days. Joe did not tell anyone where Charley was located, and he soon passed away from his injuries. Now, I'm not entirely sure if Joe was fully coherent at this time, and he honestly may not have realized that Bill had passed away. I'm not sure, so he could have just confessed thinking that Bill would show them where Charley was. I don't know. Now, after the death of both Bill and Joe, Charley's brother Walter, who had been in the carriage, if you all remember, with the two kidnappers, was taken to New York City to view their dead bodies. So this poor kid has had a lot happen to him, in his 5 years of life. So Walter looked at Joe and Bill's remains and claimed that these two men were indeed the two men who had taken the boys from their front yard earlier that year. Now, at first, after reading that, I was thinking, sisters still received letters from various men who claimed to be the kidnapped Charley Ross. In the year 1934, a man named Gustav Blair, who was 69 years old, asked for the court to recognize him as the real Charley Ross. Gustav claimed that he was Charley. He had been abducted, and after that he was forced to live in a cave until he grew older and was adopted by a man who told Gustav he was Charley. Walter Ross did not believe Gustav's story and said that the idea that Charley was still alive was completely absurd. He had given up hope that his brother would ever be found alive. Now, since Gustav's claims in court went uncontested, the courts ruled somehow that he was Charley Ross. Despite this, the Ross family refused to recognize Gustav as their brother, and they did not give him a portion of the inheritance after their parents had passed. Gustav moved to LA for a bit and tried to sell his life story to a movie studio, but he was unsuccessful.